Welcome to Perspectives YYC Season 3. Exciting news! We have been officially selected to become part of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. From this season forward, we will feature short sponsor messages. The APN's main focus is to provide sponsorship to keep us afloat, and I'm grateful for it. Podcasting ain't easy or free. Today's recording is brought to you by the ATB branch of Arts and Culture. Our branch in Calgary can be found at Stephen Avenue. They have an incredible space which I walk through every time I take a much-needed caffeine break next door, a space designed as an artist venue and a clubhouse for creators and cultural workers in Alberta. I've always marveled at the space, that it's a gallery first, and that there is apparently a financial institution hidden somewhere in the back. Artists and creative entrepreneurs are often underserved at banks, but my experience so far has been one of support and collaboration. ATB even let me record a podcast in their beautiful workspace as a creator and without an account. If you're interested to learn more, check them out at atb.com/thebranch. Today's episode, I got to sit down with Audrey Lane Cockett, spoken word artist, poet, activist, scientist, performer, and just like a pretty cool person in general. We speak about nature's role in her life and her art, about her first scientific poem in grade 6, her thoughts on the creative process, and basically about the creative life here in Calgary. And spoiler alert, she graces us with a performance after all this chit-chat too. It was an exciting opportunity for me to learn about Audrey Lane, and as an added bonus, she sent me her collaboration with local music talent Twizzy Ramos. We're going to start off this episode with that track. Twizzy and I haven't met yet, but I think this opening piece is dope and a sign of things to come. Just a quick thank you for pressing play and spending your time with me and my guests. If you'd like to, press pause, subscribe, share, like, review. Just connect with us digitally. Our artists today, Audrey Lane is on Instagram at audreylane.c. Twizzy Ramos is at Twizzy_Ramos. And of course, we're now part of the Alberta Podcast Network. You can find them at Alberta Podnet. You can even follow us at Perspectives YYC. And without so much further ado, let's get started.
Grief ties a knot in my shoulder, holds me hostage to the too small couch, clamps my jaw tight all night, cracks in the morning. Grief looks at me, side eyes in the mirror. My sternum falls into my spine. I dry heave the truth, desperately trying and failing to deny. Winter came before fall finished this year. There were frost green leaves falling on top of the first snow. The aspens didn't get the chance to suck back all their chlorophyll. Their loss came cold shock. Green leaves atop first snow. It was pretty, really. Better for the leaves to die so vibrant. They would have wanted that.
Welcome to Perspectives YYC's podcast. That's terrible.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I just want to, maybe we can start with asking you kind of who you are and where you come from and how we find ourselves sitting here today.
My name is Audrey Lane Cockett, and I am a spoken word artist, and I was born here in Calgary, here on Treaty 7 land. A poet and an artistic director, and I work as a park naturalist, and I'll leave it there for now, but I like cats, and I have many of them.
what is a naturalist?
A park naturalist, yes. So I do outdoor education programs for youth at the Weaselhead Park. So take them through the forest and down by the river and teach them about ecology and biodiversity and invertebrates and water chemistry and whatever the grade is demanding.
Oh, that's neat. Is that something like you studied and got into? Okay.
Yes. So I went to school in Victoria for environmental studies and physical geography with some directed studies in ethnobotany. So I'm a nerd.
No. I just need to learn more. What is ethnobotany?
So that's like human and plants. So like how humans use plants. So like for fiber, for food, for medicines, for structures, all of that kind of stuff.
Is it always in a sort of use it for sustenance and for tools rather than like aesthetic qualities and like the focus and perspectives, how we aromatherapy?
I mean, that could be part of it. I think it's just kind of like studying the intersection of humans and plants as opposed to just like focusing on like the molecular biology of like how a seed germinates or something like that, which is cool too. But for me, my interest definitely lies at like the intersection of how humans are interacting, how plants have shaped cultures around the world.
I think it's fascinating
for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, before we get to where we are now, I mean, what drew you to something like that? Is that something you've always been interested in? Or?
What drew me to that? I think like through my education at UVic, it brought me to some quite beautiful, amazing places. I took a field school in Heiltsuk territory, which is on the central coast of BC, near Bella Bella, and ended up working at a place called Quay, which is like a Heiltsuk-run cultural revitalization camp, and I did some gardening for them. So like looking into restoring some berry gardens that are like deep in their culture, and I just had the pleasure and like honor of being able to be there and work for them and learn and contribute by gardening, and that it was just fascinating because there's so much history there and so much like ways that people are using plants there and have that deep rooted, like still very present, like understood confluence between those things.
I kind of want to just stay here for a bit. I don't know. I mean, you can stop me.
Whatever.
No. I wonder
but
too.
All this informs my poetry too.
I was going to say it has to.
Yeah,
I feel
definitely.
like, even if somebody's studied, I don't know, something particularly dry, in my perspective, if they find creativity and beauty in it, then it will inform their creative spirit.
Yeah.
But as a trope, going into the idea of nature and specifically plants, I mean, there has to be a connection to some creativity. By essence.
Absolutely. So I've definitely been described as a wild poet before. I think my love of place, my love of like outdoors, my love of nature and fascination with like those natural processes and how they affect humans and how history is all wrapped up in like our connection to place has definitely informed one, how I see the world, two, how I create, and three, what I create about.
Is there an overarching perspective or opinion that you have right now about our relationship to plants? Maybe, I don't know if it breaks down into today, historically, how plants were essentially before humans existed. We hear these topical descriptions like, what is it, like wheat or corn or something couldn't exist. There's all these weird headlines that come out in alarmist news articles about why you have to either hate GMO or distrust this. But I mean, as someone who actually studies it, is there overarching opinion about your studies? Like, are we doing okay?
Are we doing okay? I think I'll talk about, instead of like plants, I'll talk about place. Like, I think it's really, really important to better understand our connection to place and cultivate connections to place and understand our place here and like understand like Indigenous histories better. Yeah, understand like our connections. And I think that connection to place can bring a lot of joy, can bring a lot of community, can create healthier lifestyles and just like more connected living, which I think is a beautiful thing.
We were about to look at one of those trace your gene, services, etc.
Sure.
And I remember hearing about it, in the ethos for a long time. But last year I met a woman who actually performed this thing. So she got all this like genealogical data and history relating her to so and so, but also she got interesting advice about what types of foods she might be more natural to consume because of her genealogy. So your parents come from the highlands of wherever, and they survived on. But there's something fascinating about that especially in Canada in North America, as a continent of essentially immigrants, like how confusing something like that is. Like the idea of place is strange.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there something where you feel like we've, not lost our way perhaps, but it's become quite confused, I think. Even using the word place, is it something that needs to stretch farther than our immediate experience?
Yeah, no, I really agree. I think that as a country of there's obviously lots of Indigenous cultures intact and thriving, and but there are a lot of immigrants and settlers, and that colonial presence deeply affects our connection to place and our understandings of it. So I think there's lots of work to do in unlearning some of our colonial brain, and also just like giving in to place and paying attention and noticing. And I think for me, like, it's been such a rewarding experience. Like my what started as just like, growing up, and my family took me out to the mountains a lot, and that kind of started that awe, that appreciation for nature. And I always joke that like that was my church, like going out to nature, going to the woods. That was always my place of reverence, my place of like feeling connected to something greater. And I think that's informed how I go through my life, and I found it to be really rewarding. And a lot of my work circles around like bringing people to the woods in one way or another. Yeah, I think connection to place is super important, and a lot of really valuable cultural growth can happen in that learning about place.
So take me through then. So you've obviously got this great connection to the concept of nature, to the, I guess, suggestion of history, of food, of plants. You studied it in school.
Yes.
So where does the writing start? Does it start before then and through? Does it start after? I mean, how do we get into not just writing, but being a performer?
For sure. Yeah. So I've kind of always written poetry, like since a very young age. And honestly, a lot of my like young poetry was also about plants. Like I'm like a through and through nerd. Like I did my first published poem was out of like a 2-year science fair project I did about invasive grasses versus like native grasses, and like different ways of controlling that. It actually affected some city policy. Oh my gosh. But yeah, it was called Rough versus Smooth, about rough fescue and smooth brome, my first published poem. So yes, it's always been quite a consilient thing, both together.
So maybe if we can look at...
Sorry.
No, let's look at that. I mean, how old were you when you write it? What drives you to write it? Yes. How does it get published? I mean, it's fascinating because it's, typically the trope of poetry is this sort of self-deprecating angst that starts off with I'm sure there's that level of it too.
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely.
But you wrote a science poem. So, I mean, now I have to know, I think. So how old were you and what was leading up to that you felt compelled to write that?
In grade 6. Yeah, I was in grade 6. I had just learned about photosynthesis, and like that's kind of how the project came about. I kind of just made some observations, and my mom is like really supportive and was like, yeah, let's make a whole project out of that. And we got excited. But in terms of like the poetry aspect, it's kind of always been my way of processing information and like making connections between like my emotional side and my right brain, and kind of making those connections, making sense of the world and like expressing it. That's always been a really important method of expression for me, and the way that I best understand things is through that expression and finding those connections. So I think it was just like writing that piece was about understanding the emotional side of it, which is also where I really love to live. Like, I am a scientist, I am an artist, but I love living at the intersection between art and science and community. Yeah, that's where I find the most spark for me.
Well, it's the interesting thing about the beginning, that metaphor of you studying the intersection of humanity and nature.
Yeah.
And now there's an intersection of, I mean, when you're very young, about science and language.
Can't believe I shared that story.
Why? It's fascinating. I think, one of the things that I want to do, one of the things I want to do with perspectives in general is sort of focus it more constructively. So I was sat down recently by a painter, Jessica Bross. I had a great meeting with her. And she kept asking me, essentially, without getting into the full 2-hour conversation,
Right.
what questions could I ask, or what could I direct? How could I direct all of my work with perspectives away from sort of a cynicism and an easy blaming sort of tone, and look for either people like yourself, individuals, or conceptual ideas of what we need to do to just help Calgary kind of push through that next threshold. So
Yeah, I think that's awesome. That's also something I definitely like strive for in my work, and some of the projects I'm working on right now are really about like not capturing, like platforming different perspectives and trying to have more beautiful conversations between groups that might, typically have a lot of like trope conflicts and like some hurt and maybe some bitterness and blame and stuff like that exists, but doesn't really need to. And like, I think there's lots of injured interactions in Canada between groups, and we could get into that more if you want.
Well, sure. I mean, maybe as a way to get into that conversation, I look at, we just had in the pre-chat, Kyle was educating me on some interesting, what would you call it? Branding information, marketing, primal branding, primal branding. I keep telling him he should be mic'd up, but I don't know why he won't do it. In our next iteration of the studio, we'll have it, everybody with we'll have 60 mics ready to go on a giant mixing board.
Love it.
So with the primal branding concept is this thought in my mind about, one of the terms was about defining an other and having to essentially present yourself against something in order to define yourself. Yeah, there's a weird thing. I think it's innate in human perception that everything needs to be in contrast. Like, we won't understand that this is a colorful dog painting without having seen a drab, like something in gray. We won't understand that this is light without having dark, all this. And then, of course, into the more specific things about hate and judgment. And this will come out way after the election's over, but the current topic as of today, April. We're recording this. I shouldn't date it, but April 10th.
Yeah.
So we're about to partake in a provincial election.
Yeah, it's on my birthday, the election.
Oh shit!
I'm just hoping the UCP doesn't also have a party.
So that's the thing, learning about primal branding and the intentionality of these messages, learning about these biases that are now inherent. I mean, I joked the other morning about Facebook getting caught influencing the US election and just saying, yep, sorry, and then nothing happens. Like, it's the level in which we are sitting as kind of obscene. So how do we get this message of solidarity and unity without perhaps participating in that kind of conversation?
Yeah. I think that's a really important question to be asking. Through my own work, like where I'm finding a lot of joy right now, a lot of like my own like super anarchist inclinations, something that I'm finding ways to participate in that, in answering that question, is I'm working on a project called Wild Constructs. Yeah, Wild Constructs is in collaboration with the Weaselhead Park that I work for, and it's a series of 6 videos and with 7 or 8, 9 local artists, and all of them super talented, all of them coming from different disciplines with like poetry, music, visual art, like all sorts of storytelling, drumming, different disciplines, but also each one with a different perspective, each one with a different community and understanding. And for me, that has been a really beautiful process of seeing how people are reacting to this place. And it's kind of in reaction to the Southwest Ring Road being built and kind of examining the different impacts that is bringing. And I was part of like the biological impact study. And for me, always I kind of think about the human, like how are different humans being impacted, and it's been so fascinating. I've learned a lot about different perspectives, perspectives from mothers, perspectives from Tsuut'ina people, perspectives from all sorts of different communities, and my own, and understanding my own better a little bit. And art is a really cool way of having these conversations and also platforming these kind of ideas, because I think art has a way of doing it where maybe it doesn't raise people's hackles in the same way that politics does. And we can just have these honest conversations and understand like the impacts on different communities, on different people, on different art forms, and understand each other on a level that, maybe like works around some of our defensiveness, some of our internal qualms. And yeah.
It's fascinating. What, as an organizer, because I feel like in particular, I think the magazine more than anything, but I feel like we're essentially kind of trying to take the same approach.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe my question might be, how do you find the curatorial process of something like that? How have you gone about finding artists that will fit your conception of what that message could, ought, and should be? And then organizing in a way that's palatable for people. And,
Sure, yeah. I'm not like so concerned with being palatable, but no. In response to your question, that like curatorial process and like directing, producing process for me, it started as just such a small idea. Like I was just recording wild sounds. All of the pieces and wild constructs are backed by like a wild soundscape from natural sounds that I've been recording for the past 3 years. So it started as listening. And that's been a through theme for all of it. It started by listening to the sounds of the wild, listening to the sounds of construction, understanding how those two impact each other. And then it's kind of broadened out into, okay, like what other stories am I not hearing? And trying to reach out and fill in those gaps. And it's been a real huge learning experience for me, and also uncovered some of my blind spots that I didn't even know were there. It's been awesome kind of curating that and seeing where the lack is, seeing where my own like story doesn't cover everything, not nearly. So just finding other people who can add to that. And, at the end of the day, we're not ever going to get like the huge full perspective, but just kind of trying to highlight ones that might not necessarily be hugely represented generally. So
the idea of observing one's own bias through one's own bias is, it's tautological, but it's interesting. Like we tried, I'm trying this open call theory where anybody that I think feels that they have a message or a story or some expression that they want should feel open to sharing it with us, and we don't want to judge what goes in. But then the reality is there's also bias there. How artists feel that they're ready, and that self-deprecating voice that generally creatives have, blocking probably, for every story that I get, that's amazing. Like there's probably 100 that might be equally as impactful.
Totally.
But they're not ready yet. And then the final thing is the magazine layout, etc., will dictate, can we put these two pieces, are these two similar, etc.
Totally.
When you add in a live element, it's fascinating. I just built that music show with Fig James Music and
cool. I've worked with
Cannons.
them before.
Yeah, Taylor.
That's sweet.
And I mean, that's a pain in the ass.
Oh my gosh. It's been so much more work than I thought it would be.
It's crazy.
It's nuts.
I mean, I got lucky. I mean, I got ill and everything, so I couldn't actually participate as much as I should have. But watching Taylor and Austin, all those guys kind of like hit it because they've done work like that before. There seems to be sort of a structure they approach it with. But when I'm watching them work, it's a marvel because I'm thinking if I had to do that from scratch, the number of mistakes that I have to make that would quadruple or exponentially raise the workflow. But also change, I think, who I decide would perform, which is a kind of a weird thing, right?
Yeah.
Whether they're good message and then they have to be a good performer. Actually, it's one of the...
That's what was
it called?
Important.
Power... Whatever Kyle's thing was... what was it?
Primal branding. Always best.
This is why I'm anti-capitalist, because I can't even keep simple logos and brands in my mind. I'm just too stupid, apparently.
No.
One of the things was having a focal, like a leader or a character or a person that can express all the views.
I should say that was also a huge part of my like curatorial process, is just like, okay, who do I know that's like uber talented and like amazing and like, brings also a different like art form and like a different way of creating. So that was also part of it, like not only perspectives, just like talented, like very talented team.
Fascinating. The other thing I was thinking about is, that the only adage I can think of is like, how can you hear anything if you never stop talking? So like, you talk about using listening and sounds as a starting point for that.
Yeah.
The visualization, let's say, of a pond or a creek or a mountaintop, and then the visualization of a construction zone or traffic or idling a car, I couldn't tell you what they would actually look like, but if there was actually such a visual difference, that would become a fascinating thing.
I feel like there would be.
Yeah, from a primal branding standpoint, I mean, do you have any set ideas of how you're going to distribute these things? Are they going to be on, like how accessible are they going to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Something I'm kind of really thinking about right now. And this is all new for me. Like, this is my first time producing, directing, like thinking about a media rollout plan. Like, this is so I'm going through big learning curves in terms of that. But yeah, I think we'll like have like a screening that we really put on for the public, for our community, and people who have been really invested in it, but also submit it to a lot of film festivals and see, maybe they'll get picked up as a series, maybe some individual ones, maybe some dance ones will want like our ones with dance, some, music ones will want our musician ones, and seeing how that goes. But then eventually, after seeing how it does in festivals, I definitely want to release it to the public on a wider scale and have it, available for educational tools, have it available to the public, have it available to the city, to everything. So yeah, eventually I want it publicly available.
How long do you think the individual videos are intended to be? I don't know how much in the post process.
Have it definitely. So they'll all be around 7 minutes.
7 minutes. Rolling back a little bit and going back, I mean, we are talking about this creative process and the idea of creation, but maybe more specifically from a writing perspective then. So we're talking about sort of these more project-oriented things, but let's talk about these specific, let's say a piece, a poem or something that you intend to perform. How does that come about? Is there usually, for example, some type of event that's an impetus and then you write it and you decide to perform it? Is it the opposite? Is it like a deadline to perform and then you got to scribble something and you make it? I mean, I'm sure there are different examples, but what is your approach to this creative process as an artist?
Yeah, I think there's different ones. So sometimes I'll be in a place and a poem will just kind of really come to you and flow through you, and you feel like you're really channeling some kind of energy and it's kind of gifted to you. And those are really exciting ones. But a lot of the times it's more, I have a concept and I'll marinate on it and think about it for like months and like slowly create kind of how I want to, get it across and just work at it until it gets there and go through some pretty like rigorous editing. I love editing. It's like cutthroat and great.
So I mean, specifically, let me think about the concept idea then. I mean, what is something that would drive a poetry project based on a concept? So
Okay.
is it something that you might read or something that upsets you? Or what is it that might spark you to decide that I need to spend the next 6 months developing XYZ?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I'll give you an example of a poem that I did a pretty long like research process on. So I last year, a year and a half ago, I was really like consumed by the question of belonging and what that meant and where people find it. So for months I would ask almost everyone I met, like, where do you go to belong? And they would answer and I would listen. And at the end of the day, I would write down everything I remembered and try to do a really good job of remembering it all. And then kind of after a festival where I just like went nuts and asked so many people this question, I kind of distilled the answers and found a lot of connections between what different people were saying, my own thoughts about it, and created a piece that was about belonging and really, yeah, listening. I was kind of just paying attention to what people said and my own feelings around it. And I'd ask, sometimes I'd ask like a river where it went to belong and kind of intuit whatever that answer might be.
No, I like that. On the asking question, my Dutch friend, there's a word in Dutch describing this, but essentially I think it distills to talking at the well. So essentially, if you have an idea, concept, usually I think he was describing for entrepreneurial business, but that you have to go to the town well and you have to talk to everybody that you meet there to get an idea of like that interchange.
Yeah.
So I suddenly hear that in that your process, at least in this example, isn't so much that you lock yourself in a cabinet and mull and come up with, I mean,
I was just going to say that, like, I think it needs both, like a lot of paying attention and then also some locking yourself away and being like, okay, I have all of this fodder now. I have all of this influence. Now I need my
your
super
voice.
Introverted, like, just lock myself away and do the work.
And to specifically ask you about this project, I mean, was there anything specific that brought up the word belong? Like, it's
my own questions around it, my own insecurities around it, my own journey with belonging, and my own history. And like, I'm a settler here on this land, and through that question, I got to learn a lot about my own history, my own family, and that's been really rewarding. And also just, yeah, like, I think we all want to belong. I think we all need that as humans and as people, and I think we all belong to each other and all belong to the earth. So yeah, I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I wonder often from this dramatized idea of art and creativity, there tends to, at least in a movie setting, although this might be primal branding or whatever, but I mean, it doesn't have to be a catastrophe, of course, but
heartbreak.
Yeah, or something, right?
Yeah.
A wall that you hit, or a question that's asked of you that you can't answer.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's always required, but somehow I suspect that that's where creativity has to come from. Hitting something that you can't immediately overcome.
Sure. Yeah. I think so. Sometimes, yeah, and I think a lot of, like, I definitely have poems that are more, about some pain and trauma, and I have poems that are, about some of that healing process as well. And that's a different process than the one I just described, but I think so. I think challenge and like kind of chewing on something is a lot of creativity can come from that, and creatively navigating those issues is also important. And sometimes that wall, that's something that like stops us in our tracks, doesn't have to come from pain. It can also come from like astounding beauty and like feeling compelled to like, oh, I need to share this. I need to like share this experience and how amazing it was. And that can be a real challenge and a cool process as well. So I think it can come from that pain, and can come from that angst. It can come from love. It can come from heartbreak. It can come from like those are all inspirations.
Is there something in any of those forms that and whether it's yourself or you view in other, let's say, poets or creatives, that seems to be, I mean, there's a line there where when you hit a wall, you either take it like you did in your example. For example, you go out, you develop a question, you ask people, etc., and it becomes a project, or you wallow and you disappear, and it defeats you, at least in some time frame. I mean, and everything I think that we experience has different time frames that we approach them. I mean, I know that in my case, whatever in retrospect and in hindsight I had been to express the creative side of my personality, it wasn't until I had completely bottomed out at 38 and kind of like destroyed my life, was on the verge of just, suicidal depression and just being such an angry piece of shit to my family, to everyone around me, blaming, pointing out. And when I broke, this process of rebuilding is where I think perspectives comes from, because, in some of the examples you mentioned, why does it only have to be when I'm feeling like nothing that I get the impetus to do something about it? Why can't I just meet someone cool and then tell other people that I met cool people, right? So it needs to be both, I think. But so many people, I think, get trapped there. I mean, is there any perspective on your part on what helps motivate you to kind of actually be a creator instead of some of that kind of just, does nothing?
I would be untruthful if I said that I haven't ever experienced those lows. Like, I definitely struggle with depression, anxiety, my own mental health and conditions, like love, truth, beauty, goodness.
Cats, I've heard.
Cats. Yeah. Oh my gosh. My brother got a new puppy. I feel like that's a good one. No, but I think what keeps me going, I don't know why this is a hard question for me. My grandpa has kind of this like mantra of truth, beauty, goodness, and love. And those questions and those answers and those concepts are really, I feel like, encompass things that do keep me going. Like love. Love keeps me going in a lot of places. Community love, place love, trying to like maintain that self-love. And I think a lot of us have this like self-saboteur inside of us that always is kind of like clawing and being like, you're stupid, or like, you are not good enough for this opportunity, or like, you can't do that. And definitely that person lives inside of me. But there's also this other person that lives inside of me of like, yeah, we got to do it though. Like, everyone's inadequate, but we're here and we have to show up to it. So trying to give space to not only the saboteur being like, you're not good enough, and be like, okay, I hear you, but also this other person inside of me is saying like, yeah, maybe none of us are good enough, and we still are here and we still have to make the best of it and ultimately have value and have something important to share, and sharing of it is important as well. And yeah, so just trying to give space to all those little creatures inside of me, even the ones that are sabotaging, kind of listening to them too and being like, hey, I hear what you're saying. That's valid, but also it's not the only thing. And trying to have balance with that. Sometimes I fall out of balance with that. It's totally get into low places, and I find my like the way that my energy works is I go into super lows and like where I'm like, oh, like nothing is great, like everything's really hard right now, and then go into those high energy. I feel like I'm in a high energy place right now of just like all of the projects, and I set deadlines and I'm living up to my commitments and I'm doing the most, and then I get really tired and then high and then low. So it's just a cycle.
I mean, thank you. That's great insight. I think mentioning your grandpa is fascinating, how much those familiar structures and getting mentorship or being able to hear what the mentorship is, or it doesn't even have to be family, because not a lot of us are even necessarily blessed with great strong relationships there, but rather just hearing that positivity in general from other creators. That I probably misquote this now, but I think it was Robert Frost that was like, they asked him like, to describe life, and he says, I have 3 words to describe life. It goes on, or something like that. I was thinking, I don't know if I've already used this, so we'll have to cut this part out if I've overused this parable, but in the Zen books I've been reading, they talk about the flower. So one of the practices he talks about is when you farm the flower, as the flower starts to rise, it will attract weeds.
Mm-hmm.
But if you work all your way, take the weeds out and you throw them out, you're missing the point.
Mm-hmm.
And so the suggestion in the Zen farming thing is that you take the weeds out and you lay them at the feet of the flower so that they can fertilize and feed the flower to bloom further. And that metaphor has been sticking with me as a creative because, like you said, this idea that we can eliminate the negativity in our own minds is impossible. So how do we accept that? And then find a way to just do the next thing? Fuck, that's hard.
It's so hard. And also like, we are all human and like we are all making mistakes and then being like, oh, that's so many lessons there. And that's something I've been really trying to embody is like, I've made mistakes. I've made blunders and like done things and being like, oh, I wish I did things differently that way. But then, okay, like we still have all these opportunities in front of us to do things differently, make new mistakes, keep on learning, keep on building something beautiful. And we should just bother Kyle and stay here another half an hour, but we have to wrap up. Okay.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else. So I didn't get a chance to get to ask you to perform something for us. So you'll have to come back. But
I could do a really short one.
Oh yeah. If you've got something that you think, prep, I don't want to pressure you. But,
no, I can.
I can. Shit. Yeah, for sure.
Sorry, I can do a really short one. That is kind of stems from my grandpa's philosophy on truth, beauty, goodness, and love, and my interpretations of that. We are sleeping. We are sleeping. Butter heart sizzle on the back burner consciousness. Too bad we're all broken yolk and half cracked consciousness. Wake up. Wake up. Don't take it apart. I'll give you my heart whole. Be warned, it's bottomless. Black, infinite, and ominous. Swallowing stars, cosmic hominids, sucking each other in like Romulus. Suckled the wolf dry with Remus. I would be remiss not to remind you that the world needs us. That is, the wild Wolverine women trust, even though they leave us, it's always in the dust of their own ashes. This poem comes in flashes, Polaroid memories. Loving you is like eating celery. Inefficient calorie, burns up all my energy, doesn't give back. The picture of us is blue tacked to the wall and it's fading beneath my unstoppable sunrise. All my atoms ionize, I synchronize in circadian symphony. That's my rhythm. That's my rhythm. It's all already written, coded, DNA. Night lives in infamy of the day and all we can do is shed light like dawn. Curtains drawn, give way. Wake up with the sun. Say something true. Mean it. Wake up with the sun. Celebrate goodness. Mean it. Wake up with the sun. Love something beautiful. Mean it. Mean it.
Thank you. I don't know how to conclude now.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I know we've been wanting to do this for a while, so I'm really glad.
Thank you so much for joining us, or me.
Pleasure.
I wish you luck on everything. Please let me know if there's anything I can do in general.
I will, yeah.
We'll talk after about me stealing some of your performances for my podcast. But
yes.
Okay, any last words, plugs?
Nope, thank you. Be well.
The APN is an Albertan-focused support initiative created by Karen Unland to help support and promote local podcasts to grow and thrive. There are a select but growing number of amazing podcasts on this network, such as Creative Block, the show run by my producer and friend Kyle Marshall, which focuses on highlighting fascinating Calgarians and their creative processes. You can find his and other members' work at albertapodcastnetwork.com.